Ever feel like just one person's bad mood can bring down like a whole meeting? Like their negativity is practically contagious?
Yeah.
Well, you're not imagining it. Today's deep dive is all about this phenomenon, what the source material calls toxemia, and how to handle it.
It's interesting, isn't it? The word toxemia really drives home the point that negativity can be toxic, almost like a
Absolutely.
poison that spreads throughout a team.
Totally. And speaking of toxic, the source material introduces us to this guy named Niraj. I'm not sure if you have a Niraj in your workplace, but
Oh, yeah.
his story is going to sound way too familiar for a lot of
I'm
us.
sure we've all encountered a Niraj at some point.
Right. So picture this. Monday morning meeting, the team is trying to get energized for the week ahead, and Niraj just throws out comments like, this project is going to be a disaster, or there's no way we're going to hit that deadline.
Oh, classic.
Just like that, the energy in the room plummets.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that the source material highlights how even the most positive people can get dragged down by this kind of chronic negativity. It's like toxemia doesn't just impact the individual. It creates this ripple effect that impacts the entire team.
Exactly. It reminds me of the study I once read about how negativity can actually be more contagious than happiness. We're wired to pay more attention to threats and negative stimuli, so it makes sense that one person's bad mood can easily spread to others.
That's a great point, and it underscores why it's so important to address toxemia, not just for the sake of individual well-being, but for the health of the entire team.
Absolutely. But before we jump into solutions, I'm really curious about the why behind toxemia. What leads someone to become a Niraj in the first place? Because I have a feeling it's often more complex than just being a grumpy Gus.
You're absolutely right, and thankfully, the source material dives into some of the potential root causes of toxemia. Now, it's important to note that these aren't excuses, but they do provide some helpful context.
Okay, so let's unpack these causes. What are some of the reasons someone might be bringing that negativity to work?
Well, chronic dissatisfaction is a big one. This could be rooted in a feeling of being undervalued or underappreciated, or maybe they're just generally disillusioned with their work or the company culture.
That makes sense. It's like their negativity becomes a way of expressing their unhappiness.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Then there's bitterness, which might stem from past experiences where they felt overlooked or unheard. Maybe they were passed over for a promotion, or their ideas were constantly dismissed.
So their negativity becomes almost like a defense mechanism. Like, if I expect the worst, I won't be disappointed.
Precisely. And that can be really tough to deal with because it often feels like they're not even open to positive possibilities.
You're right. It's almost like they're trapped in a cycle of negativity.
And the source material also points to insecurity as a potential factor. Someone who seems resistant to new ideas or change might actually be afraid of stepping outside their comfort zone or the possibility of failure.
That's a really good point. It's like their negativity is a shield to protect them from potential disappointment or judgment.
Exactly. And while that might make them feel safer in the short term, in the long run, it can really hinder their growth and prevent them from contributing their best work.
So it sounds like understanding these potential root causes is crucial because it allows us to approach the situation with a little more empathy and perhaps even find more effective ways to address it.
Absolutely. Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about the why behind toxemia, the better equipped we'll be to navigate it effectively.
Well said. So we've established that negativity can be toxic. We've met Niraj, and let's be honest, we all know a Niraj. And we've started to unpack some of the underlying causes of toxemia. But before we dive into how to deal with these negativity ninjas, let's take a moment to look inward.
Ooh, this is where it gets interesting. The source material actually provides a self-assessment tool to help you gauge your own levels of toxemia.
Exactly, because let's face it, sometimes we might be the Niraj in the room without even realizing it. Okay, so self-awareness time. The source material calls this the Toxic Reflections Assessment, and it's all about taking an honest look at our own behavior. Ready to get a little introspective?
I'm always up for a little self-reflection, especially when it comes to something as important as our impact on others.
Right. So how does this toxic reflections thing work?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. The source material presents 5 key questions, each with a rating scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being never and 5 being always. As we go through these, try to think about a specific person at work and how often these statements ring true for them.
Okay, that's helpful. I've definitely got someone in mind already. Hit me with the first question.
All right, question number 1. How often does this person complain about work or colleagues? So on a scale of 1 to 5, how often is this person airing their grievances big or small.
Okay, I'm already seeing a pattern here with this person I'm thinking of. All right, what's the next question?
Question number 2. Do they spread rumors or gossip in the workplace? This one gets at that subtler form of negativity. Are they often the source of whispers and speculation?
Ooh, that's a good one. And it reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about negativity spreading like a virus. Gossip is definitely a way that toxemia can spread quickly and create a really unhealthy environment.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on to question number 3. Does their negativity affect my mood or productivity? This one is about tuning into your own experiences and noticing how their negativity lands on you.
That's such an important point because sometimes we can be so caught up in dealing with someone else's negativity that we don't even realize how much it's affecting us.
Exactly. So it's crucial to be really honest with yourself about how this person's behavior is impacting you. Okay, 2 more questions to go. Number 4, do they frequently resist new ideas or changes?
Ah, yes. The classic sign of a toxemia sufferer. They're the ones who shoot down every new idea before it's even had a chance to breathe. It's like their default mode is no. What's the final question?
Okay, last but not least, do conflicts seem to arise more often when they're involved? This one is all about patterns. Do you notice that this person seems to be at the center of a lot of workplace drama or disagreements?
Okay, so we've rated this person on all 5 questions. Now what? How do we interpret the results? Give me the breakdown.
So the source material provides a handy guide for understanding your score. If your total score is between 6 and 7 points, you're in the perception zone,
Meaning?
meaning you're picking up on some potentially toxic vibes, but it might not be a full-blown case yet. It's something to keep an eye on, but it's not necessarily a cause for alarm.
Okay, that's reassuring. What if your score is a bit higher?
Well, if your score falls between 10 and 18 points, the source classifies that as a problem.
Okay, so the toxemia is becoming more noticeable and potentially disruptive. What's the advice for dealing with that? Should we stage an intervention?
Hold your horses. We'll get to strategies in a bit. First, let's address those really high scores. If you landed somewhere between 18 and 25 points, you're in pain territory.
Ouch. That sounds unpleasant, to say the least. What does pain even look like in this context?
At this level, the person's toxemia is likely pervasive and significantly impacting your work life, your team's morale, and potentially even the overall success of projects. It's definitely a situation that needs to be addressed.
Okay, so we've identified the negativity, we've assessed the severity, and now I'm assuming it's time for action. What does the source material recommend for dealing with these negativity ninjas? Because I'm all ears.
Well, get ready to take some notes because the source material introduces a fantastic strategy called the neutral approach.
Neutral. I love acronyms. Tell me everything. Okay,
Yeah.
neutral. It's memorable and it implies we're not approaching this like a knockdown, drag-out fight. I like it already. So how does this approach actually work?
It's all about providing a structured framework for navigating negativity in a calm, constructive way. You're not trying to change who they are, but you are setting boundaries and advocating for yourself and your team.
I love that, setting boundaries. Because it's not our job to fix anyone, but we can control how we respond to negativity. Now, break down this neutral acronym for us. What's the first step?
The N stands for Notice the Toxic Behavior. It sounds simple, but it's about consciously acknowledging the negative behavior without judgment.
Okay, so we're hitting pause on that inner monologue that's probably screaming, here we go again, and just observing the behavior objectively.
Exactly. It's about saying to yourself, okay, there's that negativity again. I'm not going to engage with it, but I am going to acknowledge it.
Okay, I'm on board with that. So we've noticed the behavior. What's next?
The E stands for empathize. Now, this doesn't mean you have to agree with their negativity. It's about showing that you understand their perspective, even if you don't share it.
That's so key, right? Because often negativity stems from a place of frustration, insecurity, or feeling unheard. So even if their behavior is off-putting, it's helpful to remember that there's usually something deeper going on.
Exactly. And sometimes just feeling heard and understood can de-escalate the situation. You're not condoning the negativity, but you're acknowledging their feelings.
Okay, so we've noticed the behavior, we've empathized. Bring on the U.
U stands for understand the impact. This is where you gently but clearly explain how their negativity is affecting you or the team.
So it's about setting boundaries and saying, hey, this behavior isn't just a personal quirk, it's actually impacting our work and our team dynamic.
Exactly. And you can do this without being accusatory. You're not attacking them. You're simply stating the facts.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's the T in neutral?
The T is for take responsibility for your reaction. This step is all about modeling healthy communication. It's about owning your feelings and reactions without blaming them for how you feel.
So instead of saying you're making me feel stressed, it's about saying I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed right now and I need to take a step back.
Exactly. It's about setting a positive example while also protecting your own mental space.
Love it. Okay, we're on to R. What does that stand for?
R is for reframe the conversation. This is where you actively try to shift the focus from problems to solutions.
Ah, so it's about gently steering the conversation toward a more positive and productive direction.
You got it. It's about saying things like, okay, I hear your concerns, but what if we focus on what we can control? Or instead of dwelling on the negatives, what's one thing we could do to move forward?
It's like you're injecting a dose of optimism and possibility into the conversation. I'm into it. What about the A?
The A is for address the behavior, and it's about, well, addressing the toxemia head on. Now, this needs to be done appropriately and with sensitivity, but sometimes direct communication is necessary.
So in some cases, we might need to have that tough conversation where we say, hey, I'm noticing this pattern in negativity and I'm concerned about its impact on the team.
Exactly. And finally, the L in neutral stands for lead by example. This step is all about walking the talk. You've outlined a more positive and constructive way of communicating. Now it's about embodying those principles in your own interactions.
It's about being the change you want to see.
I love it. The neutral approach, simple, yet so powerful. Now, does the source material give any real-world examples of how to actually use this approach? Because I think that would be super helpful for our listeners.
You read my mind. The source material dives into a couple of common workplace scenarios, and it even provides some sample scripts, which I think you'll find quite useful.
Oh, perfect. Hit me with the scenario.
Let's say you're dealing with a colleague who's constantly complaining about a new project. They're convinced it's going to fail, and they're bringing everyone down with their pessimism.
Yes, we've all been there. So how would we use the neutral approach in that situation?
Well, you might start by noticing the behavior, saying something like, hey, colleague's name, I've noticed that you've expressed some concerns about this project. You're acknowledging their negativity without judgment.
Okay, so we're not ignoring the elephant in the room, but we're also not getting sucked into their negativity vortex. Exactly. Then you can try to empathize by saying something like, I understand that change can be challenging, and it's okay to have questions or concerns.
Okay, so we're validating their feelings without necessarily agreeing with their assessment of the situation. What's next?
Then you'd want to gently point out the impact of their behavior, perhaps by saying, but I've also noticed that when we constantly focus on the potential downsides, it can make it harder for the team to feel motivated and come up with creative solutions.
Ah, so we're connecting the dots between their negativity and its impact on the team's overall morale and productivity.
Yes. And from there, you can use the remaining neutral steps to reframe the conversation, encourage a more positive and solution-oriented approach, and ultimately lead by example.
This is fantastic. I'm already feeling better equipped to deal with negativity ninjas at work. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap up?
I think the key takeaway here is that toxemia is rarely about you, and it's not something you have to just endure. By understanding the why behind the behavior, recognizing the signs, and having strategies like the neutral approach in your toolkit, you can navigate negativity with grace, set healthy boundaries, and create a more positive and productive work environment for yourself and those around you.
Beautifully said. So the next time you encounter a neurage at work, remember a little neutrality can go a long way. Thanks for diving deep with us.